He was a brilliant scientist, handed the key to understanding life itself, an ancient, perfect machine. To save a friend, he was forced to use it on another human being. He typed in a harmless command, praying he was right, but the alien device had other ideas. What happens when your greatest discovery forces you to become a monster? What do you do when the power to rewrite reality is in your hands and you make a mistake? Hashtag. The abyss is a place of absolute silence and impossible pressure. 2,000 meters below the sun-kissed surface of the Aegean, the sea is not blue, but a thick, velvet black, a crushing void that extinguishes all light and sound. Here, in the sterile, cramped cockpit of the Triton 7 submersible, the only sounds were the gentle hum of the life support and the soft, steady voice of Dr. Elara Vance. Maneuvering arm into position, she murmured, her eyes never leaving the bank of monitors that were her only window into the crushing darkness outside. Her face, sharp and practical, was painted in the cool, blue-white glow of the screens. Target is Quadrant Gamma, the main amphore field. Outside, bathed in the submersible's powerful exterior lights, the ghost of a 2,500-year-old Phoenician trading vessel lay scattered across the seabed. It was a graveyard of clay jars and rotted timbers, a site Elara and her team had been carefully excavating for 3 months. Her work was methodical, patient, a science of peeling back the suffocating layers of time and water. The submersible's robotic arm, a marvel of engineering, moved with a delicacy that defied its immense strength. It brushed away centuries of silt, revealing not the expected curve of another clay pot, but the hard, straight edge of something man-made and metallic. "Hold!" Elara commanded, her voice sharpening. "Hold position. Zoom in. Camera 2. The image on the main screen resolved. It was a chest, small, no larger than a shoebox. But it was wrong. Terribly wrong. While everything else in the wreck was scarred by time and the sea, this box was pristine. Its surface, a dull, heavy grey, was seamless, showing no sign of the corrosion that should have devoured it millennia ago. "Material scan," she ordered, her fingers flying across a console. "That looks like lead, but the integrity is impossible." A bead of sweat traced a path down her temple. The science, the rigid laws of chemistry and decay that governed her entire world, screamed that this object should not exist. A progress bar filled on a secondary screen as the submersible's sensors probed the chest's contents. Elara held her breath. The scan resolved into a wireframe image, and the air froze in her lungs. Inside the perfectly preserved lead, the scan revealed a dense, intricate latticework of gears, dials, and interlocking rings. It was a machine, more complex than anything her archaeometrist colleagues had ever conceived of from this era. It was dense, it was sophisticated, and it was utterly alien to its historical context. She ran a diagnostic search, cross-referencing the design against the global archaeological database. The result flashed back in stark red letters. "No match found." "Gently," she whispered, her voice now tight with a mixture of awe and professional dread. She took manual control of the robotic arm, its metallic pincers closing around the impossible object with the care of a surgeon. "Gently. Let's bring it home." As the arm lifted the chest from its ancient tomb, Elara Vance knew, with the chilling certainty of a scientist witnessing a miracle, that she was holding something that would either redefine history or break it entirely. Thousands of kilometers away, sunlight streamed through the dusty windows of a cluttered workshop, illuminating a world that ran on perfect, predictable time. The air hummed with the gentle, synchronized ticking of hundreds of clocks. Grandfathers, cuckoos, marine chronometers, and skeletal table clocks all measured the passing of moments in a harmonious chorus of brass and steel. This was the sanctuary and prison of Dr. Kaelen Rhys. Kaelen himself was hunched over a workbench, a loop fixed to his eye, his hands moving with the preternatural steadiness of a master craftsman. he was meticulously assembling a tourbillon, a rotating cage of gears and springs designed to defy gravity itself. One of the most complex mechanisms ever designed for a timepiece. At 40, he had the brilliant, haunted eyes of a man who had seen a universe of possibilities and been punished for it. He was a horologist, a master of mechanical systems, but he had once been much more. He had been a professor, a theoretician whose work on deterministic mechanics and complex systems had been poised to revolutionize the field. But his ideas had become too radical, too close to the line between physics and philosophy. He proposed theories of causality that his peers deemed reckless, unscientific. And so they had cast him out. Now, his world was this workshop, a fortress of gears and levers where every action had an equal and opposite reaction, where the future could be precisely calculated by the movement of the past. He sought refuge in the certainty of clockwork. Propping up his mug of cooling coffee on his desk was a framed letter. The letterhead was from a prestigious international institute. The text within, cold and dismissive, outlined the reasons for the final rejection of his tenure and the termination of his research grant. He used it as a coaster, a small daily act of defiance against the world that had branded him a heretic. He had been exiled from their world of theory, so he had built his own, a world of tangible, predictable, physical law. Here, in his mechanical solace, there were no anomalies, no variables he could not account for. Here, he was in control. That night, the comforting ticking of the clocks was an irritating distraction. The familiar orderly workshop felt small, confining. The blue glow of a monitor screen painted Kaelen's face in stark shadows, erasing the weary bitterness and replacing it with something he hadn't felt in years, a raw, electrifying awe. On the screen was Elara Vance, an old colleague from his university days, her face tired but urgent, and beside her image were the scans of the device. Kaelen leaned in, his breath fogging the screen. His professional indifference, the armor he had built around himself for a decade, had vaporized in an instant. The scans showed gear trains of a complexity that made his tourbillon look like a child's toy. The interlocking rings suggested an orrery, but the subsidiary mechanisms were arranged in patterns that weren't astronomical. They looked almost biological. "We've run every analysis we can," Elara's voice crackled through the speakers. "The material isn't just lead. It's an isotope we can't stabilize, which is why it hasn't corroded. The internal mechanism, it's gold, but alloyed with something that doesn't appear on the periodic table. Kaelen, it's a black box. It absorbs every sensor wave we throw at it. My team is baffled. They're calling it a hoax, a modern creation somehow planted in the wreck." "It's not a hoax," Kaelen whispered, his voice hoarse. He was tracing the lines of a gear train on the screen with his finger. The wear patterns on the internal pivots, the micro fractures, they're consistent with age. But the design, it's from a technology that shouldn't exist for another 2,000 years. At least. "Exactly," Elara said, her eyes locking on his. "The board wants to seal it in a vault, label it unexplained, and bury it under a mountain of paperwork. I can't let that happen. This thing is the most important discovery in human history, and we're treating it like an accounting error." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. "Our archaeometrists are useless here. They see a historical contradiction. I need someone who sees a system, a machine. I need someone whose entire career was built on thinking about impossible mechanics, someone willing to think outside the box they've been put in." The unspoken words hung in the air between them. "Someone like you." The heretic they threw out. Kaelen leaned back, the awe on his face now warring with a decade of bitterness. The establishment wanted him. The people who had mocked his theories and destroyed his career now needed his unique mind. The irony was a bitter pill, but the image on the screen was a siren's call. It was the ultimate clockwork puzzle, a machine that defied the very laws of time and technology he had dedicated his life to understanding. It was a chance to prove, once and for all, that he had been right. that the universe was far more complex and strange than they had ever been willing to admit. "My consulting fee is considerable," Kaelen said, the words feeling alien in his own mouth. Elara managed a faint, tired smile. "Somehow, Kaelen," she said, "I don't think you're going to be doing this for the money." The transition from Kaelen Rhys's dusty analog workshop to the Aegis research facility was like stepping from one century into another. The air here was sterile, filtered, and smelled of ozone and antiseptic. It was a world of brushed steel, seamless glass, and the hushed, reverent silence of cutting-edge science. At its heart, in a climate-controlled cleanroom, sat the reason he was here. It rested on a softly lit pedestal inside a thick, pressurized glass case. It was smaller than he'd imagined, a fist-sized orb of what looked like gold and crystal. Interlocking rings, finer than any he had ever worked with, formed a complex spherical cage around a core of crystalline gears that seemed to drink the light. It wasn't inert. As he drew closer, he could feel a faint, almost subliminal vibration in the air around it, a latent energy that made the hairs on his arms stand up. "We call it the Cygnus Object," Elara Vance said, her voice low, standing beside him. "After the constellation, it was the only star chart on the wreck that was inexplicably accurate for the wrong century." She gestured to a nearby monitor displaying a chaotic cascade of data. "This is what we've been getting for the last 2 weeks. Nothing. It's a ghost. Gamma rays are bent around it. Magnetic resonance imaging shows a void. Sonics are absorbed without a trace. It's as if the laws of physics become suggestions in its immediate vicinity." Kaelen barely heard her. He circled the glass case, his eyes alight with an obsessive fire that burned away the last decade of bitterness. He wasn't seeing a priceless artifact or a historical anomaly. He was seeing the work of a master craftsman from another world or another time. He saw a system, a purpose, a perfect design that hummed with silent, sleeping potential. He saw the most perfect machine ever created. "It's not a ghost," Kaelen said, his voice a reverent whisper. "It's waiting." The next 3 days were a masterclass in scientific frustration. The analysis lab became their entire world, a hermetically sealed chamber of failed experiments and mounting tension. They started with high-frequency sonic resonators, bombarding the Cygnus Object with sound waves that could map the atomic structure of a diamond. The device simply absorbed them, the readouts flatlining as if they were broadcasting into an infinite void. Next came the gamma-ray tomography. For 12 hours, they scanned the object, the machine humming with power. The resulting image was a blurry, useless sphere with a hole in the middle, a data black hole where the object's core should be. Its internal workings seemed to actively shift and realign, defying any attempt to get a clear image. It was less like scanning a static object and more like trying to photograph a phantom. "This is pointless," Kaelen finally snapped, slamming a fist down on a steel console. The lab was littered with printouts of nonsensical data. "We're treating it like a Fabergé egg, Elara. It's not an ornament. It's an engine. An engine needs fuel to do anything. And what do you suggest we do? Hook it up to the main grid?" Elara retorted, her patience worn thin. "Kaelen, this is a unique object. It survived 2,500 years at the bottom of the sea. I am not going to be the one who destroys it by randomly pumping energy into it. Protocol is clear. We do not risk invasive procedures." "Protocol is for things we understand," he argued, his voice rising. "This is beyond protocol. It's beyond everything we know. Your non-invasive methods are telling us nothing. It's a door, and we are standing here admiring the paint instead of looking for the keyhole. It wants to be turned on. That's your ambition talking, not your science." She shot back, her gaze firm. "My science, my responsibility, is to preserve it. Until I know what I'm dealing with, we do nothing that could be irreversible." Their methodologies, their entire scientific worldviews had collided. Her caution, born of a respect for the past, was a cage to his intuitive, reckless ambition. born of a desperate need to understand the future. The perfect machine sat between them, silent, waiting for one of them to win. Night fell, but Kaelen didn't leave the lab. The hum of the facility's climate control was the only sound as he sat alone, poring over high-resolution microscopic images of the object's surface. The others had gone, defeated. But Kaelen was a man who understood that the most profound secrets were often hidden in the smallest details. He magnified a section of the golden surface, filtering the image through different light spectra. And then he saw it. A pattern, so fine it was almost invisible, not of tooling or engraving, but of something else entirely. It was a network of microscopic apertures, branching out in a fractal design. He overlaid the image with a slide from a botany textbook. The pattern was a near-perfect match for the vascular structure of a plant's leaf, a system designed to transport fluid and energy. A radical, electrifying thought took shape in his mind, a hypothesis so far outside the bounds of conventional mechanics, it felt like heresy. And in that moment, Kaelen felt the familiar, dangerous thrill he'd felt years ago, just before his world came crashing down. The device wasn't meant to be powered by electricity, not in the conventional sense. It wasn't purely mechanical. It was something new, a hybrid. The apertures weren't for oil or energy conduction. They were for something alive. He scribbled furiously in a notebook, the words flowing out of him. Not a clockwork machine, a chrono-biological engine. It doesn't interface with power grids. It interfaces with life. It was the most insane, unsupported leap of his career, and he knew with absolute certainty that it was correct. The main lab was dark, save for the emergency lighting that cast long, distorted shadows. Elara was gone, having left hours ago after their argument. Kaelen was alone. He stood before the clean room, his heart pounding with a mix of terror and exhilaration. He had made his decision. Working quickly, he jury-rigged a low-voltage bioelectric probe, a piece of equipment used for measuring the neural impulses in living tissue. He calibrated the output to the lowest possible setting, just a whisper of the electrical energy that animates all life. Bypassing Elara's security lockout, he opened the glass case. The faint humming from the object grew infinitesimally louder as it was exposed to the open air. His hands, usually so steady, trembled as he attached the probe's contact points to the microscopic apertures he had discovered. He retreated to the console and took a deep, shuddering breath. "Show me," he whispered. He activated the probe. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a silent, fluid grace, the Cygnus Object came to life. The interlocking golden rings began to rotate, spinning in silent, complex orbits around the crystalline core. Light bloomed from within, not a harsh electric glare, but a soft organic luminescence. On the surface of the central orb, a single, unfamiliar symbol glowed with a soft, steady light. It was beautiful, perfect, and at that exact moment, across the lab, came a frantic scrabbling sound, followed by a sharp, cutting squeal. Kaelen tore his eyes from the device. In a brightly lit cage, a single lab rat, prepped for an entirely unrelated neurological experiment the next morning, was convulsing violently. It thrashed for a few seconds, a silent, horrific dance of death, and then fell still. A profound, bone-deep chill washed over Kaelen. He looked at the glowing, elegant symbol on the surface of his perfect machine. Then he looked at the dead, twisted form of the rat in its cage. There was no connection. There could be no connection. It was a coincidence, a 1 in a billion statistical fluke. The logic of his scientific mind screamed it, but as he stood there in the silent lab, bathed in the soft, alien glow of the device, he knew with a certainty that defied all reason and logic that it was not a coincidence at all. The silence in the analysis lab the next morning was heavier and colder than any vacuum. It was the silence of a crime scene. Elara Vance stood ramrod straight, her face a pale, furious mask. In her hand, she held a single sheet of paper, the lab rat's autopsy report. "Do you know what this says, Kaelen?" she began. her voice dangerously low and tight. It says the subject is in perfect health. No toxins, no pathogens, no signs of cardiac arrest or aneurysm. It just stopped. The official report lists cause of death as instantaneous and total cessation of all autonomic functions. That's not a medical diagnosis. It's a description of a magic trick. She slammed the report down on the console next to the security footage, which showed the rat's violent, inexplicable death on a continuous loop. Kaelen, who hadn't slept, who looked as if he'd aged a year overnight, didn't flinch. He simply pointed to another monitor, displaying a complex temporal analysis. "Look at the timestamp," he said, his voice hollow. "I've synchronized the facility's atomic clock to the security feed and the device's activation log. The rat's neural activity ceased at the exact nanosecond the symbol on the Cygnus Object reached full luminosity. Not a millisecond before, not a nanosecond after. It's a perfect correlation." "Correlation isn't causation," Elara snapped, though her voice lacked its usual scientific conviction. "It's a coincidence, a freak." "No," Kaelen interrupted, turning to face her, his eyes wide with a terrifying new understanding. "It's not. I've been wrong this whole time. We both have. We've been trying to figure out what the device is predicting. But it's not a predictor. It's not a calculator." He took a shaky breath, the full weight of his new theory settling over him. "The device didn't predict the death, Elara. The glowing symbol was the death. It's a command. We thought we found a Phoenician computer. We didn't. We found a weapon that writes reality onto biological systems. The line between science and superstition, between a machine and a curse, had just been erased. Kaelen's mechanical puzzle had become a mythological horror, and in the sterile, logical confines of the lab, he was forced to abandon every rational assumption he'd ever held. The office was a world away from the functional chaos of the labs. It was a space of quiet, immense power, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Aegean. The man who sat behind the large, empty desk was dressed in a tailored suit that likely cost more than a year of Elara's research funding. He was Alistair Finch, and he radiated the unnerving calm of limitless wealth. He had listened to Elara's panicked, impassioned report without interruption, his fingers steepled, a faint, paternal smile on his lips. He then turned his attention to Kaelen, who repeated his wild, terrifying theory about the device's true function. "Remarkable," Finch said, his voice smooth as polished marble. He stood and walked to the window, his back to them. "Absolutely remarkable." He turned, and his smile did not quite reach his eyes. "Dr. Vance, your caution is admirable. It is the bedrock of good science. However, in the face of such an unprecedented discovery, we must also guard against a failure of imagination." He dismissed her concerns with a casual wave of his hand. "A lab rat dies. It's unfortunate, but in a facility this size, it is a statistical inevitability, a coincidence." He then fixed his gaze on Kaelen, and his eyes glinted with something that looked like predatory approval. "But your theory, Dr. Rhys, that is not caution, that is vision. The kind of paradigm-shifting thinking that history remembers." Finch's charm was a disarming, venomous fog. He was praising Kaelen, empowering him, while simultaneously belittling Elara's valid ethical and scientific concerns. "I am the primary benefactor of this project," Finch stated simply, as if explaining gravity. "And I want you to proceed, Dr. Rhys. I want you to test your hypothesis. You will have unlimited resources, anything you require. Do not let small minds or bureaucratic protocols stand in the way of true discovery." He was offering Kaelen the key to the kingdom, the validation he had craved his entire adult life. Elara watched in silence, a cold dread seeping into her bones. She realized with chilling clarity that Alistair Finch was not a patron of science. He was a collector of power, and he had just found the ultimate prize. Driven by Finch's mandate and the burning need to know, Kaelen descended into a fever of obsessive work. He barely ate or slept. The lab became a maelstrom of his thoughts, the walls covered in charts, diagrams, and hand-scrawled notes attempting to decipher the device's alien syntax. His theory evolved. The symbols weren't just commands, they were a form of biological programming language, a divine source code for life itself. Each symbol, he believed, corresponded to a core function: cell division, metabolism, neural activity, senescence. He had the alphabet. Now he needed to learn the grammar. He found Elara in her office, staring blankly at a page of meaningless administrative paperwork. "I need your help," he said, his voice fast, manic. "I think I've done enough helping," she replied coldly. "I've isolated a potential sequence," he pushed on, ignoring her tone. "Based on its recurring position in non-lethal functions, I think it's a modifier, a temporal one. I need to test it, but I need a more complex system than a single organism. I need to see its effect on an ecosystem." Elara finally looked up at him, and her eyes were filled with a horrified disbelief. "A more complex system? What are you talking about, Kaelen? Plants? Animals? You want to use a weapon you don't understand to experiment on living things?" "It's the only way to prove the theory," he insisted. "We have to know what it's capable of." "No, you have to know," she shot back, standing up, her voice trembling with rage. "This has stopped being about science for you. This is about your ego. This is about you proving to the world that you were right all along. I will not be a part of it. I will not stand by and watch you commit a monstrous ethical breach in the name of your ambition. Consider this my formal objection. I'm shutting you down." But Kaelen knew, and she knew, that her authority meant nothing anymore. They weren't in a world of scientific protocol. They were in Alistair Finch's world now. The biodome lab was humid and warm, filled with the rich, earthy smell of life. Inside a 10-foot-tall sealed glass terrarium, a miniature rainforest thrived, a vibrant, self-contained ecosystem teeming with exotic plants, mosses, and fungi. It was a perfect, jewel-box world, and Kaelen Rhys was about to become its god. Finch had, as expected, overridden Elara's authority. She stood in the corner of the lab, defeated and afraid, a witness forced to watch the sacrilege. Finch observed from a sterile viewing gallery above, a modern Caesar in his skybox. Kaelen stood at a console linked directly to the Cygnus Object. On the screen was the sequence he had isolated. The string of alien symbols he hypothesized meant accelerated senescence. To grow old, to wither, to die. "Whenever you're ready, Doctor," Finch's voice echoed calmly from an intercom. Kaelen's hands hovered over the activation panel. This was it. The culmination of his life's work. The ultimate validation of his wildest theories. He glanced at Elara, saw the profound disappointment in her eyes, and then looked away. He activated the sequence. Inside the terrarium, the effect was instantaneous. It was not a process. It was an event. The lush, vibrant green of the plant life did not fade. It vanished. Broad, waxy leaves curled and browned in a fraction of a second. Brightly colored flowers turned to brittle grey husks. The very air in the sealed container seemed to thin and turn stale. In less than 3 seconds, the entire thriving ecosystem collapsed, withered, and turned to fine, sterile dust. Kaelen stared at the biological holocaust he had just wrought. His scientific triumph, the beautiful, abstract elegance of his theory, had curdled into an absolute, soul-crushing horror. He had been right, and he had never been more wrong. The horror of the biodome was not a memory that faded. It was a searing, continuous present. Kaelen stood in Alistair Finch's penthouse office, a sterile, minimalist void of white marble and glass that overlooked the city lights like a god's viewing platform. The dust of the dead ecosystem still seemed to cling to him, a phantom shroud of his sin. Finch, holding a glass of what was probably obscenely expensive whiskey, was laying out his vision for the future. He spoke not with the mania of a madman, but with the calm, chilling rationality of a CEO outlining a 5-year plan. "The markets, to begin with," Finch said, swirling the amber liquid. "Imagine causing a targeted, untraceable blight on a competitor's coffee bean crop in South America. The stock plummets. We acquire it for pennies on the dollar. A month later, We used the device to restore the crop. It's the perfect invisible hand of the market, my hand. He took a sip, his eyes distant, imagining his new world. Politics, of course. A troublesome senator, a rival CEO, a foreign diplomat who won't play ball, a sudden tragic heart attack, an aggressive, fast-acting cancer, all perfectly natural, all perfectly deniable. The device is the ultimate tool of influence. No armies, no spies, just a quiet, biological certainty. Kaelen felt a cold sickness coiling in his gut. He had unlocked the secrets of a primordial machine, a key to understanding life itself, only to hand it to a man who saw living things as entries on a ledger. Finch finally turned from the window, his gaze settling on Kaelen. And then, of course, there is the personal application. Aging is, after all, just a biological process, a program. And with your help, Doctor, we will learn to rewrite it, to halt it, perhaps even to reverse it. He smiled, a thin, predatory curve of his lips. The pharaohs built pyramids to chase immortality. They were thinking too small. He saw himself as a god, and in his eyes, Kaelen was no longer a scientist. He was the high priest, the only one who could interpret the divine text. Kaelen, trapped in the glass tower, finally understood that he hadn't made a discovery. He had unlocked a plague. He found Elara in a service corridor, her face grim and set. Her official credentials had been revoked, her access to the labs denied. She was a ghost in the machine she once helped run. "I saw the biodome telemetry before Finch's men locked me out," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "Kaelen, what you did..." "I know," he choked out, the shame burning in his throat. "We can't let him keep it," she said, her expression hardening with resolve. "We can't let this happen. There's a hardwired data purge in the main server room, a last resort for catastrophic data contamination. If we can get to it, we can wipe every bit of research, everything you've deciphered. Then we destroy the device itself. It's our only way out." It was a desperate, suicidal plan, but it was a plan. A flicker of hope ignited in Kaelen's chest. They moved quickly, staying to the access hallways, avoiding the main arteries of the facility. The server room was in the sub-level, behind a heavy, keypad-locked door. As they rounded the final corner, they froze. Standing before the door were two men. They weren't the familiar, paunchy facility security guards in their ill-fitting blue uniforms. These men were dressed in black tactical gear, armed with short-barreled carbines, their faces impassive and professional. They were mercenaries. The Aegis research facility was no longer a scientific institution, it was a fortress. And as the guards turned their cold, dead eyes towards them, Kaelen and Elara knew with sickening certainty that they were prisoners. The clean room was cold. The Cygnus Object sat on its pedestal, silent, pulsing with latent power. Finch stood before it, flanked by his two mercenaries. He looked disappointed, like a father scolding a pair of wayward children. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" he asked, his voice soft, laced with condescension. "That I would acquire the most powerful object in human history and secure it with a simple keycard system?" He gestured for Kaelen to stand before him. "I know all about you, Dr. Rhys. I know about your disgrace. I know about the papers you published that were ridiculed. I know about the man who led the charge against you, who called you a fantasist and a pseudoscientist. Dr. Marcus Thorne, he destroyed you." Finch's voice was a venomous caress. He was peeling back every layer of Kaelen's soul, exposing the raw nerves of his failure and his ambition. "I am offering you a choice Thorne and his ilk could never even dream of. Help me unlock this device's full potential, and I will give you everything you ever wanted. Your name will not just be cleared, it will be etched into history above Newton, above Einstein. You will be the man who conquered life itself." His gaze hardened, and he gestured to Elara, who was being held firmly by one of the guards. "Refuse me, and you will both simply disappear. An unfortunate lab accident. Your work, your discovery, everything. It will be forgotten. You will be a footnote that no one will ever read." He was weaponizing Kaelen's deepest desire, the need for recognition, for vindication, and aiming it directly at his conscience. "I find a demonstration is always more effective than a threat," Finch said calmly, as if ordering lunch. "Bring him in." The clean room doors opened, and another guard dragged in a man in his 60s, arrogant and terrified at the same time. Kaelen felt the blood drain from his face. It was Dr. Marcus Thorne, his tormentor, the architect of his ruin. "Dr. Thorne was consulting on a project nearby," Finch said with a chilling smile. "A happy coincidence." He turned to Kaelen. "I want you to use the device on him. Nothing lethal. A simple command. Temporary paralysis, perhaps? Just to prove the principle of the thing." Kaelen stared, horrified. "No, I won't." "You will," Finch said, and the guard holding Elara pressed the barrel of his carbine against her temple. Time slowed. Kaelen's mind screamed. He was trapped. He looked at Thorne, the man who had ruined his life, and felt nothing but a sickening wave of pity. He turned to the console, his hands shaking so violently he could barely type. He accessed the symbolic language, his mind racing to find the sequence for something harmless, something reversible. Neural suppression, minor motor functions. He thought he found it. A simple, 3-symbol command. He prayed he was right. He engaged the sequence. The device activated. A different symbol glowed on its surface, not the one he had intended. Thorne didn't drop. He screamed. It was a horrifying, gurgling sound as his body began to change with impossible speed. His skin bubbled and shifted, his bones audibly cracking and reforming under the flesh. A horrifying, rapid cellular mutation twisted his form into something grotesquely inhuman before he collapsed to the floor, silent and still. Kaelen stumbled back from the console, his mind shattering. The quest for knowledge, the desire for vindication, the beauty of the perfect machine, it had all led to this act of grotesque, obscene violence. His spirit broke. He doubled over and vomited onto the pristine floor of the clean room, irrevocably stained by the horror he had unleashed. The dawn light that filtered into the small, sterile holding cell was grey and unforgiving. Kaelen Rhys sat on the edge of a narrow cot, his head in his hands. He was a hollowed-out thing, a ghost haunted by the grotesque, twisted image of Marcus Thorne's death. Elara sat across from him, her own face etched with fear and exhaustion, but her eyes were still defiant. "There has to be a way out of this," she said, her voice a fierce whisper. Kaelen looked up, and the life in his eyes was gone. He looked utterly, completely broken. "There is no way out," he said, his voice flat and dead. He was right. Finch was right. The device's power, you can't fight that. You can only serve it. He let out a dry, rattling sigh that sounded like stones grinding together. "I'll do what he wants. I'll help him. At least that way you'll be safe." Elara stared at him, despair washing over her. The last spark of fight in him had been extinguished. This was the end. As she slumped back against the cold wall, defeated, Kaelen moved. He slid across the floor and gripped her arm, his fingers digging in with surprising strength. She looked up, and the broken, hollowed-out man was gone. His eyes were suddenly clear, sharp, and blazing with a terrifying, focused intensity. "Listen to me," he whispered, his voice urgent and alive. "There is no controlling it. Not for Finch, not for me, not for anyone. I know that now. But I've been looking at the problem all wrong." He leaned closer, his words barely audible. "I spent all this time trying to figure out its language, what it does to other living things. I never stopped to ask what it is." He tapped his own chest. "It's biological, Elara. Its power source, its processing matrix. It's all a living, organic system, impossibly complex. It rewrites life, but it is also itself, alive." A grim, determined smile touched his lips for the first time in days. "I'm not going to give Finch control. I'm going to do what he asked. I'm going to give the device one last command. I'm going to program it to eat itself." Kaelen sat at the console in the clean room, his posture slumped, his movements slow and deliberate. He looked like a defeated man going through the motions, a perfect performance of obedience. In his office, Alistair Finch watched on a monitor, a triumphant smile on his face as he saw his new high priest finally fall into line. Kaelen began a complex diagnostic sequence, a process he explained would take time to ensure the device was stable for Finch's more ambitious projects. It was the perfect cover. As his fingers danced over the console, he subtly triggered a single, isolated alert on the facility's network, a pressure warning in a cryogenic storage unit in a completely different sector. His signal. The moment the alarm blared through the facility, Elara moved. Half of Finch's mercenaries were immediately diverted, their comms crackling with orders to investigate the cryo alert. That left 2 guards in the main corridor. They turned as Elara burst out of a side lab, not with a weapon, but with a large wheeled nitrogen dewar. She shoved it with all her might. The guards, surprised, stumbled as the heavy tank crashed into them. Before they could recover, she smashed a fire alarm on the wall. Emergency klaxons screamed and heavy shutters began to descend. She didn't fight them with strength, she fought them with chaos, using her intimate knowledge of the lab's systems to turn the facility itself into her weapon. Kaelen worked, his focus absolute. He ignored the alarms, the shouting on the comms, the chaos Elara was sowing. He was composing his final masterpiece, not with gears and springs, but with the language of life and death. He bypassed Finch's monitoring software, accessing the device's core programming. He found the sequence for cellular degradation, the one he had used on the terrarium, and began to twist it, turning it inward, creating a recursive loop. He targeted the command at the device's own biological matrix. He typed the final symbol. On the screen, a single, elegant word appeared in the alien script, a word he now understood. Autophagy, self-consumption. In his office, Finch saw the symbol flash on his monitor. His triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure fury as he understood the betrayal. "No!" he screamed, sprinting from his office, racing towards the lab. It was too late. Kaelen hit execute. The device began to glow, the soft organic light inside it brightening to a violent, unstable intensity. The beautiful, intricate golden rings on its surface began to corrode, developing black, cancerous lesions that spread with unnatural speed. The crystalline core began to crack, light bleeding from it like a mortal wound. It was executing its final command with perfect, horrifying efficiency. It was devouring itself from the inside out. A massive, unstable energy field erupted from the dying machine. A wave of pure force that tore the console from its moorings and sent Kaelen flying. The air crackled, and the very walls of the cleanroom began to groan and buckle. The device let out its death cry, a silent, expanding sphere of reality-warping energy. Dusk settled over the smoking ruins of the Aegis facility. From a nearby hill, Kaelen and Elara huddled together, watching the fires burn. They had escaped through a service tunnel just as the main structure collapsed, consumed by the device's final violent act. Finch, who had been racing towards the cleanroom, had been caught at the epicenter of the pulse. He was gone. The device, the data, the mercenaries, the research, all of it was gone, reduced to fused slag and ash. There was no proof. Nothing was left but the silence and the smoke. Kaelen had won. The world was safe. But he had lost everything else. His chance at fame, at redemption, at proving to the world he was right. It had all been sacrificed in that final, necessary act of destruction. He was, once again, the disgraced academic, a heretic with a story no one would ever believe. He looked down at his hands, bathed in the soft orange glow of the setting sun and the fires. They were not the steady, precise hands of a brilliant horologist who built perfect machines. They were the hands of a man who had unlocked a terrible power, committed murder, and then, in the end, had found the wisdom to destroy his own creation. He had surrendered his ambition for the sake of the world, and in doing so, had finally found a truth far more profound than any scientific discovery. Some things were not meant to be known. What's so compelling about a story like this is how it takes a classic scientific mystery, the impossible artifact, and slowly transforms it into a moral horror story. At the beginning, Dr. Rhys's quest is pure. He's a disgraced academic looking at the ultimate intellectual puzzle. We're right there with him, wanting him to unlock its secrets, to vindicate himself. But the story cleverly shows how the pursuit of knowledge is never truly pure. It's always tangled up with human ambition, ego, and the desire for recognition. The moment Alistair Finch offers Kaelen the fame he's always craved, the quest for understanding becomes a quest for power. The device stops being a scientific marvel and becomes a weapon, something closer to an ancient, malevolent curse than a piece of technology. And that leads to the incredible, tragic conclusion. The ultimate act of scientific genius wasn't deciphering the machine's code. It was realizing that the code itself was too dangerous to exist. Kaelen's final triumph wasn't a discovery he could publish. It was a moral choice to destroy the knowledge itself, sacrificing his own ambition to protect the world from it. So, it makes you wonder, if you discovered a power that could solve humanity's greatest problems, but also carried the risk of absolute corruption, would you try to control it, share it, or would you destroy it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.